coffee?
All right, let's stop having fun and get to work here. Today is, what is today? July 19th, and we have a land use hearing, Z0067-17-CP and Z0068-17-Z. I'd like to call to order the meeting, and before we begin, I'd like us to all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I got to read all this. At this hearing, we will consider an application by Rosevilla, Inc., affecting property generally located 1 block west of Southeast River Road and bordered on the east by Southeast Schroeder Avenue and on the west by Southeast Laurie Avenue. The application before us consists of 2 separate requests. 1, a post-acknowledgement plan amendment of Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan to redesignate the subject property from low-density residential to high-density residential, and that's Z00. I don't know if this is a 0 or an O.
It's a 0.
Okay, Z0067-17-CP and a corresponding zoning map amendment for low-density residential to high-density residential for the majority of the site, and from medium-density residential to high-density residential, Z0068-17-Z for the remainder. The hearing will proceed as following. We'll first hear the staff presentation from Senior Planner Martha Fritzie. The applicant will have up to 20 minutes to present. Next, I'll open the public hearing for public testimony, beginning with public officials, who will have 5 minutes each. Then representatives from recognized community planning organizations and agencies will have 3 minutes each. Finally, other people wishing to testify will have 3 minutes each. The board will then deliberate on either rendering a decision today or set a time to make a decision at a later date. Assisting us in the hearing today is Clerk Kevin Moss and Assistant County Counsel Nate Boderman. If you wish to testify, please complete one of the green cards and give it to Kevin. If you have prepared a written statement, please give a copy to Kevin and use your time to summarize what you have written. Everyone who wishes to speak will have an opportunity to do so. We'll now begin the hearing with a legal statement by Nate Boderman, Assistant County Counsel, followed by staff report Martha Fritzie, Senior Planner.
Good morning. Now is the time set for public hearing to determine the merits of the applications identified as Z0067-17-CP and Z0068-17Z. This is a quasi-judicial land use hearing, which means 2 important things for those making the decisions and those participating in the hearing here today. First of all, the criteria that can be used in reaching a decision have been identified in the staff report. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards those criteria identified in the staff report or other relevant criteria found in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulations that anyone may believe applies to the decision. So, to the extent possible, please direct any testimony to those relevant criteria. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that particular issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issues precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Once final, this decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And at this time, I'll ask the Board of Commissioners to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest you may have. If you have any, please indicate the nature and the extent of the ex parte contact and indicate whether you intend to participate in the hearing this morning.
Any problems? Oh.
So if anybody wishes to challenge the impartiality of any commissioner, please clearly indicate your intention to do so in any testimony you may give this morning.
Nope. Okay, we'll now hear from Martha Fritzie.
Hi, good morning. We are, as noted, here to discuss a proposed comprehensive plan designation change from low-density residential to high-density residential and a corresponding zone change from low-density residential and medium-density residential to the high-density residential zoning designation. Rose Villa has requested this zone change to enable them to develop the subject properties in conjunction with neighboring properties that they own, which are already zoned high-density residential, and this is intended to be a future phase of their continuing care retirement community. The location of the site is on this map in front of you. It includes 5 separate tax lots. They total roughly 1.3 acres. The majority of the site is zoned R10, low-density residential. You can see where that MR1 is written on that one tax lot. That is the portion of the property that is currently zoned medium residential. And the property is currently contains 3 single-family dwellings and 1 triplex, the triplex being on that MR1 zoned piece. And to the north and east, you can see the current development of Rose Villa's continuing care retirement community. To the west are some single-family residences, and to the south are a couple of vacant properties that are also zoned for single-family residences. This is actually rotated 90 degrees from what we were just looking at. The area of the proposed zone change is identified in the red hash marks. The other properties owned by Rose Villa are in the various colors of blue, and this is just to indicate the various phases of development that the community is proposing, or that Rose Villa is proposing for the community. And again, you can see the R10 and the MR1, the current zoning on these 5 parcels. Future plans for this area are actually identified here, although according to this, it's intended to be 9 independent living units. I believe they've actually changed that to be 12 independent living units in that area that's indicated in the dark blue on that portion of the property. And I believe they've are planning to or have recently submitted for design review to get this in process, assuming that this zone change is successful. So when assessing a comprehensive plan and zone designation change and zone change, we need to assess it according to all the criteria and compliance with the goals and policies listed here, including zoning and development ordinance criteria, comprehensive plan goals and policies, the Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, and statewide planning goals. And the staff report that was written for the Planning Commission hearing assessed all of these goals and policies and criteria in a lot more detail. I'm going to go over them very quickly this morning. The first zone change criteria is that the proposed zone change is consistent with the applicable goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. And Chapter 4 of our comprehensive plan, the land use chapter, identifies policies or includes policies that identify where specific plan designations can be designated. And the subject properties, when you look at them in conjunction with the larger tract, the larger Rose Villa tract, it does meet all of the criteria in Chapter 4 for a designation of high-density residential. And then there's some additional policies that are relevant to the proposed zone change in that chapter that are also met. Chapter 5, transportation, requires that zone changes or that changes in a land use plan designation and a zoning designation have to comply with the transportation planning rule. This I'll discuss in a little bit more detail, but what's going on here? Oh, I'm sorry. I'll discuss this in a little bit more detail on a later slide, but this proposal is in compliance with the transportation planning rule. Chapter 6 and Chapter 11 also contain some policies and goals that needed to be assessed, and Chapter 6, which talks about housing and providing housing, a range of housing and types and prices, and particularly alternatives for the elderly and the handicapped. Clearly, that's a service that Rose Villa is providing. And Chapter 11 is really just procedural and coordination, and all of those requirements have been followed in this case. Section 12.02 or 1202.03 of the zoning ordinance requires a demonstration that public services are available and sufficient for the new zoning designation. That is done in the urban area through statements of feasibility, which we have received from the sewer water and surface water providers. Those are included in your packet. Going back to transportation, the section 1202.03C of the zoning ordinance requires that the transportation system is adequate and will remain adequate, and this ties directly into the transportation planning rule. The county's traffic engineering division staff submitted some comments which are found in Exhibit 2 in the packet. They determined that this proposed zone change is not expected to generate a significant volume of traffic beyond what the current zoning allows, and it would not have a significant effect on the transportation system. And similarly, they determined that under 1202.03D, where it requires you make a finding that the safety of the transportation system is adequate, they had the applicants complete a study of evaluation of intersection site distance in a couple of the intersections in the vicinity, and the conclusion was that the safety is adequate in this area to serve the proposed development. And then so moving on, the Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan really honestly didn't have any, none of the regulations are really applicable to this particular zone change. And so anything that was applicable was met by this proposal. And under the statewide planning goals, again, all the applicable goals are satisfied. And I forgot to edit this from the Planning Commission hearing. There was some discussion at the Planning Commission hearing based on a letter that was submitted by the Fair Housing Council of Oregon and another housing organization. There was some concern that all of the needed analysis relating to Goal 10 had not been completed. And so I wrote a little memo and did some additional analysis. It's included in Exhibit 5 in your board packet that did a little further analysis and is sufficient, staff believes, to reach the conclusion that is stipulated under the administrative rule that the mix and density standards identified in that rule are met by this amendment. And so the analysis looked at housing changes, housing availability changes that had occurred through prior comprehensive plan changes and zone changes to determine whether or not the effect of this particular one would affect the overall housing stock. And it's such a minimal impact that this zone change would have. It really is not hard to reach the conclusion. We're going to have a net loss of 3 single-family dwelling units and a net increase of at least 6 to 9 multifamily units, and that really is going to have a negligible effect on the existing housing capacity. The existing housing capacity actually has a small surplus both in single-family dwelling units and multifamily dwelling units, and so it's going to adjust the mix a little bit, but it's really a negligible impact. And so that's described in a little bit more detail in the staff memorandum that I put in Exhibit 5, but it's certainly sufficient to demonstrate that this proposal does meet all of the applicable policies in statewide planning Goal 10. So there was a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission on June 12th. There was no testimony received at that hearing from the public or any other agencies. There were really no significant issues identified, and the Planning Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval of the proposed comp plan designation change and zone change, subject to the recommended conditions of approval that are identified in the Planning Commission staff report. Similarly, staff is recommending approval of these two files, subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report. And that is it.
Great. Does any commissioner have any questions?
I have one question, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman. I'm just curious as to how you conclude that there's a housing surplus. I'm not questioning that you do. I'm just curious as to how you get there.
There was an analysis done in 2005 that looked at the housing supply, and that looked at the housing supply in the unincorporated county area, and that determined that there was a small surplus, that there was sufficient housing and a very small surplus in both single-family residential and multifamily residential. And I looked at changes in the housing supply that occurred from other zone changes that happened between 2005 and currently, and looked at the net increase in loss of housing. And it included a lot of zone changes that went from like an R10 zone to an R7 zone, so a single-family residential zone to a single-family residential zone, but that allows more density. There was actually a few that changed from a residential zone to commercial, but there were some that went from low density to high density. And so it really, the net effect was a balancing out. The surplus is based on, originally is based on an analysis of, projections and housing need and buildable lands inventories. And so you look at the zoning, it's based on zoned capacity in the urban area.
Capacity. All right, thank you.
Does that make sense? I kind of went backwards through that logic.
Just a follow-up. So do you take into account increase in population when looking at if there's a housing surplus?
So yes, I didn't do a whole new analysis. Every 5 years, Metro does does projections and does an analysis inside the urban growth boundary. And I guess what I should mention also as part of that is I looked at the last buildable lands inventory and assessment that Metro did inside the urban growth boundary and the county portion, and they were also identifying that there was sufficient zone capacity for the anticipated growth in population and their housing needs. I use that sort of to confirm the information that I was working off of from 2005. The original analysis that was done back then did work off of a projection. I didn't account for any changes in the projection between that one and this one because I felt like using both of those sources was sufficient evidence.
Yeah, it is sufficient for this. It just makes my mind go to other housing affordability issues, so I appreciate you answering those questions.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll open the public portion and ask the applicant has 20 minutes if they'd like to present. I don't see a whole lot of public officials out here or anything else, so we'll go to the applicant. Thank you for coming today. Introduce yourself and general location where you live.
Excellent. Good morning, Commissioners. We appreciate the chance to be here this morning to talk about the proposed zone change for Rose Villa. My name is Sid Scott. I'm a principal with Scott Edwards Architecture, 2525 East Burnside, Portland, 97214. And I'm the architect for the Rose Villa campus. And Tina will talk more about Rose Villa, and then I'll come back and talk a little more about what we're up to.
Great, thanks.
I'm Tina Millay, Director of Marketing and Communications with Rose Villa, 13505 Southeast River Road, Portland, Oregon, 97222. Rose Villa is really grateful to be partnering with Clackamas County further on developments which help us to serve the senior population, especially in the local Oak Grove community, which we have a lot of people that move to Rose Villa from the local community. This development will help us to create new opportunities for people who need senior services, and so we really appreciate being able to move this forward.
Great.
And then do we have our slides? We probably don't need them. Martha has done a fantastic job already showing you everything. And I did want to make a comment. Staff has been really wonderful to work with through this process, and we really appreciate their efforts. Basically, we're looking to rezone those 5 parcels. The dark blue section there is where we're planning on developing a net zero neighborhood. So that something that Greenhammer, a local expert in net zero development, will be leading the charge on that. We're expecting 12 units, 1- and 2-story development. We think they'll be very compatible with the neighborhood and really create, I think, a real landmark project, not only for Roseville, but within Clackamas County as well. And then the other properties, there will be future plans for those in terms of their development. And so that's really, in a nutshell, what Roseville is up to, and we're excited to get started with it.
Great. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Let me see, what's next here? There's no representative CPOs. There's no other agencies. So we'll close the public portion of this. Well, I'll ask if anyone would like to testify on this matter. Seeing none, I'll close the public portion of this hearing today. And any discussion? Well, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve Z0067-17-CP and Z0068-17-Z as recommended by the Planning Commission and staff.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve applications as recommended by the Planning Commission, Z0067-17-CP and Z0068-17Z. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Oops, I see Martha.
I just wanted to say that I spend a lot of time at Roseville. I have a very close friend who lives there, and it's a beautiful facility and very well run. And how do I get on the list is the question. Okay, okay, that's the key question here. It's a ways off, but I hope it's a ways off. But anyway, thank you. It's delightful. I'm glad we can move ahead with this.
Yeah, our day will come.
Yeah, I know. Sooner than later. Okay.
Yeah, and I of course, am familiar with Roseville, having owned a business in downtown Milwaukee. I have many customers from Roseville. A lot of those gave up driving over time. That's probably why there's not a huge traffic impact. But it's been a long time coming, and I think what you've done so far is fantastic. And I appreciate your allowing the community to utilize some of that space at some of those meetings, and I'm just thrilled. We have two of the great senior citizen facilities, I think, in the Northwest, and happy to see you guys move forward. So with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you.